In the beginning is nothing, no thing. It is dark and vast and devoid of movement or even the slightest sound. It is. Then a spark, the smallest touch of light, the single breath of an ember born from a single moment of friction. The slightest hint of sulfur stings the air as musky tendrils of burnt iron cling and weave. In the beginning was not the word, but the intention. An intention to speak or act or move or think or see. An intention that creates and mutates and grows and evolves and spills out over into new intentions, which carry with them the magic to create life as we know it, thought as we know it, expression as we know it, and the future as we dream it to be. In the beginning, it is the intention at the inception of all else, at what will become the end-all and the be-all, the Alpha and the Omega, the dawn and the dusk. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of something more, something greater than ourselves, something that will live on eternally, something that will become in time. Legacy. In the beginning, it is the intention, your intention. Now, what will be your legacy?
My mind is spinning with ideas and information, each piece vying for center stage, convinced that it's the one piece of information that is the most important that I share with you on this gigantic subject of legacy. As a storyteller and a performing artist, the mark that we leave and the way it's remembered is what drives me most about this subject. And it's the thing that has kept me swimming up to my eyeballs in folklore, mythology, family history, current events, and of course, Wikipedia, which is arguably the greatest receptacle of meticulously gathered and casually substantiated information in our current age. It's rather like a modern interpretation of the great Alexandrian library of the ancient world, but not as much of a wonder, still decidedly less likely to burn down and disappear. In the past 5 weeks, I have traveled all over the proverbial globe and down every rabbit hole of the internet to try and accurately define legacy and zero in on a precise definition that's inspiring or at least captivating enough to keep your attention for the next 45 minutes. After hours of reading and writing and interviewing unsuspecting friends and family and meditating, dreaming, and panicking, I have come to an essential truth about the underlying unifying definition of legacy. There isn't one. When I asked the muses, and by the muses I mean my boyfriend and a few friends during a quarantine bubble potluck dinner, a legacy is a combination of things that you do or create that have a lasting impact on the world while you're here and potentially in perpetuity. If my very first Google search was any indication, the definition of legacy being an amount of money or property left to someone in a will, my quest for a more romantic understanding of legacy was already dead in the water. This led to an interesting conversation about whether a person has a legacy if they have never created anything tangible. For example, if I've never created a work of art, like a painting or a stained glass window, something physical that can be touched and enjoyed and showed to others, showing that I was once here, if I've never done that, do I have a legacy? How about if I created the world's most exquisite stained glass window with panes of malachite green, the red-orange of crushed ochre, liquid-like turquoise, and vibrant sunflower gold? What if it hung in a secret window in my house, where only I could enjoy it when the afternoon sun shone brightly through its panes and bathed my room in color? If no one else saw it,
Despite its being a physical piece of art that could, unless met with an angry gale, outlast me by decades, would it be a legacy?
This begs the question, must a legacy be observed by others in order for it to exist? Is a legacy then actually for others?
What if there was an invisible marker for every soul that passed through this plane? An imprint, a footprint, a footstep that marks a time and a place and a space where they once stood. A breath that was released while they lived. A psyche, breath.
If I die, unaware of anything I've created, or believing myself never to have created anything tangible, do others then determine what my legacy is based solely on what my life was?
Imagine a slight disturbance of vibration, like the heat that rises from the desert sun and mixes with air to forge a mirage. What if that wasn't a mirage, or a mixture of gases and air, but an imprint of a life lived and a space taken? A space inhabited for a time by a person who had weight and mass and took up space. One who is now gone, but not gone. Not gone, but not here. A memory, but not a mirage.
What would that mean for this plane of existence? Would the living walk through the memory or be pushed out for lack of space?
If I exist now, and every gesture and disturbance of the molecules around me causes a chain reaction until it spreads across the globe, would it go full circle and return to me again? Is it still the intention that I set out seconds ago, or has it evolved due to billions of other gestures and disturbances?
In essence, is the world changed by my very existence, or is my legacy determined strictly by the things that I do? In short, what is a legacy if not the story of who we are in life? So it's human nature, I think, to want to know that your life means something. That's the purpose of, I think, most philosophy and mythology, religion even, to know that you're living a life that is greater than yourself, that will have an impact in time to come, that you're part of something, a bigger purpose, and that the things that we're going through are not random, but they have a meaning, a lasting effect. What we touch now will be felt in generations to come. Bells that we ring will continue to ring or reverberate into eternity. I think, in short, we are all in pursuit of a touch of immortality. And like the gods and the heroes of great mythology, we want to know that we're part of something special, that what we do will, in essence, live on forever. What is a tombstone, actually, if not a physical marker for a life that was lived? An actual place that marks a space and a time for someone who once walked and breathed and looked up at the stars and maybe asked the same questions. And without getting into what happens to our soul or our consciousness after we pass, the gravestone is for the people left behind who can come and re-experience or remember or honor that life that had been lived on earth. And so that gravestone or that bench or tree or garden or any silent substitution for the person who once lived, that is a touch of their immortality. It is a physical place where they can be remembered, and the things that they did in their life can continue to reverberate for the people that are still here. So the ancient Egyptians had a fantastic relationship with immortality. They believed so fervently in their afterlife that it's possible that that was more of a reality to them than the current reality. And so the preparations that they made, even the humblest man or woman made tremendous preparations for their life to ensure that their afterlife will be more comfortable and maybe more fruitful than their current one. And that meant providing themselves with servants to do the chores and food and clothing and, in the case of pharaohs, chariots and furniture, jewels, pottery, everything necessary for them to literally pick up after dying and step into their afterlife exactly as they are, if not better. And one of their most fascinating concepts, the thing that I really, really love about that culture, is the concept that to say a person's name after they have died is to bring them back to life in a way. And what I mean is that it was believed that if you say the name of a deceased person, it's like reanimating them, bringing them back to a currency. And only when there was no one left on earth to say their name and tell their stories, to visit their marker or their tomb or their pyramid or their bench, not really bench, but anyway, that was only when no one was there to do that were they finally released to the land of the dead forever.
How many of Egypt's kings and queens, let alone commoners, do you think of when you think of ancient Egypt? Cleopatra, probably, but which one? There were 7. How about Ramses? There were 11 of him. Were you thinking of Ramses the Great? You might have to be more specific because they all considered themselves great, which is fitting considering the name actually means begotten by Ra, the great sun god.
My dad's name is Ray, which is another pronunciation for Ra. So I am literally begotten of Ra, the sun god, which would make me divine. And I have been trying to prove my magnificence for my entire life. And if it weren't for the fact that my name is so inextricably linked with its Latin roots, meaning earth, I think I would be pretty successful. Because I could be Terra. I don't know what the te part would be, but the Ra part, certainly, I'm working on it. Hasn't happened yet, but I'm still working on my own immortality as a goddess.
So, Cleopatra, Ramses, at least one of them, maybe Norma or one of the Amenhoteps if you've spent any time listening to Audible. Out of 3,000 years of mostly prosperous civilization, only a handful of names are still spoken aloud. Only a handful of the millions of souls who lived are still illuminated in death. Those are tough odds. There's one story of the Egyptians' belief in immortality name-calling that gives me hope for better odds, and I think it best demonstrates the elegance of this concept. I'm speaking about a boy king who died young and was lost to history for thousands of years before he was rediscovered and returned to the land of the living, where he still resides to this day. Have you heard of him? A boy who was raised with his sister away from the political chaos of Thebes, out in the far reaches of the desert in Amarna with his father the heretic, and his mother, the most beautiful woman on earth. Living as royal outliers and building a new religion to worship a faceless god among those who would follow his heretic father. A purportedly loving family as portrayed in ancient art and statuary, until he was suddenly snatched from the safety of his surroundings and orphaned at age 10. I'm certain you know of whom I speak, for he is the king who married his sister, a beauty in her mother's way, and changed their names and religion to reflect the traditional gods of his new people and realm. I know you know him, I'm sure, for you have heard, no doubt, how he grew up under the watchful eye of his statesman, into a young man, at which time he deftly took over the reins from his elder adviser, a man who many say may not have appreciated being put aside by a mere teenager. But I do think it's understandable that you might not remember having heard of him, because his name went unspoken for thousands of years. For centuries, millennia, he went without a whisper calling him back from the west, the land to which the dead travel. No one for lifetimes even suspected that there was or had ever been a missing child, let alone a child king obliterated from the obelisks and hieroglyphs. Not a one, until workers in the early 1900s uncovered, quite by happenstance, a small cup, simple enough, with just the most delicate cartouche scratched carelessly in the bottom, forming the word Tut. Tut. And with that brief utterance of rushing air made in the dust in the baking sun, amid shards of poetry and the scraping of metal spades against marble, the boy king, Tutankhamun, the golden son of the great sun god, was reborn and has never died again. And his advisor, and likely his murderer, the brief king Ai, has been long forgotten, unless you count the number of times his name has been accidentally said aloud by Elizabethans, Irishmen, and actors at Renaissance festivals alike. But I choose to overlook that as a mere technicality and consider him dead and buried.
Tutankhamun has been returned to the land of the living, and his name is said by millions and millions of people, ensuring that his history, his immortality, and yes, his legacy will continue on as one of the greatest kings in Egyptian history. Ironically, not for what he did in life, but for who he has been to us in his death. Legacy indeed.
Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had worn them really both about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference.
So I mentioned my own personal lifelong campaign to prove my connection to immortality, or at the very least nobility. And that didn't just start with my Egyptian adjacent name situation. Now I have two very likely connections to nobility. Three, if you consider the fact that I might be related to the Knudson Dairy Company, despite the fact that they spell their name differently and are Swedish. And my people are most definitely Vikings. Still, girl can dream. No, I have two slightly more plausible ways that I might be related to dignitaries and thus boost my campaign for immortality. The first is that I can claim an ancient lineage to the great Viking king Canute of England, Denmark, and Norway. Already in the title, I'm much closer than my claim to be the Knudson Dairy Queen. And since 23andMe doesn't have records that go all the way back to the 900s AD, I think I'm okay to stake my claim here.
Canute, in addition to being Norwegian, is likely the forebearer of our name, Knudson. Norwegians do pronounce the K. Our name literally is Canute's son, as in the son of Canute, the king. Equally exciting to me personally, he was one of the great early English Anglo-Saxon kings. So let's break it down by the numbers. He was Norwegian. I'm Norwegian. Almost exactly 50% according to 23andMe. He was a Viking. My dad has a Wagnerian Viking hat with horns made of plastic, but somewhat authentic, looking for Fisher-Price. Canute was an Anglo-Saxon king who united England, Norway, Denmark, and according to Wikipedia, some Swedes. I am passionate about everything having to do with England. My DNA percentages include English, possibly Swedish, and like all good Knutsons, I love a good Danish. Furthermore, one of Canute's own sons took the surname Knudson, almost the exact origin of our contemporary spelling.
Well, I think that proves I have more than enough to claim a heritage of nobility. I'm not asking much, though, by rights of my royalty. I'll just take the occasional parade in lieu of money. But no, if you're still not satisfied that I have a legal claim to nobility, then I will give you my last and probably most plausible connection, which is that I was very nearly the pineapple princess of the Pacific by rights of ancestry. I'll explain.
My grandmother was born 103 years ago in Los Angeles. In 1918, the country saw the final months of a world war raging and the pre-dawn of a new rebellious, free-spirited generation of women who raised their hems and danced to New Orleans jazz. It saw the successful outcome of the British suffragettes movement with the passing of the Representation of People Act, giving women over 30 the right to vote. And it saw the birth of one of the worst pandemics in the modern age with the advent of the Spanish flu, which would go on to kill 50 million people worldwide. It was also the year that Helen Elizabeth Brown took her first breath.
I don't need to say her name to keep her alive. I just talked to her the other day when I was interviewing her for this project. And when I asked her what she thought her legacy would someday be, she said, being joyful. Well, I can assure you it's a lot more than that.
In 1930, when the country was still reeling from the devastating effects of the Great Depression, my grandmother, a sprightly 12-year-old, was given a gift by her great-aunt, who would greatly impact the rest of her life and create the mythology that still surrounds our family to this day. While my grandmother's family lived modestly, her great-aunt was a wealthy dowager, the widow of a self-made man who, along with James Dole, played a significant role in the creation of the Hawaiian Pineapple Company, known now as Dole. Upon his death, my great-great-aunt sold her shares to Dole and lived a quiet life on the mainland. Believing that music and the arts are critical, my ancestor acquired a handmade violin and bow from Germany, which she gave to my grandma. This single act did more than give my grandmother access to a new form of self-expression. It would continue to resonate through her entire life and into ours. There was never a time in my life when I didn't see Grandma playing the violin. The music was the food of love for her and for all of us in her stead. The violin and the bow became synonymous with the strings that kept our family of women tightly wound in harmony, if occasionally discordant and in need of tuning. And the passion that came from the hypnotic motion of moving the bow across perfectly tuned strings became our DNA. It was my grandmother's second voice, and she sang with it for 70 years before shaking hands required a permanent rest. But for the entirety of her childhood, and the childhoods of her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, Helen's violin is an instrumental fixture in our lives. Like Artemis, the huntress and protector of young women, the dowager gave my grandmother a bow which she used not to hunt, but to create the most beautiful music and forge a future based on generosity, creativity, and music.
And while the dowager may have kept me from becoming the pineapple princess of the Pacific, her simple gift changed all the lives to come and the music the violin made in my grandmother's hands. Be joyful. Let's go back to the first definition we found on Google. A legacy is an amount of money or property left to someone in a will. An applicant to a particular college who is regarded preferentially because a relative attended the same institution. Okay. This one's my favorite. Denoting or relating to software or hardware that has been superseded but is difficult to replace because of its wide use. Okay, if that one doesn't inspire you, I just don't know what will.
Well, maybe this. The origin of the word is from the medieval Latin legatus, Old French legacy, English legate, Middle English legacy. As a lover of language, I love the etymology of nearly every word, but I am deeply underwhelmed by Webster's dry and utterly uninspired approach to what is a tremendously dynamic concept. Come on, Miriam, you're killing me. If we unpack these financial definitions, my legacy is then contingent on a degree of wealth that would be an estate worth leaving behind. That would potentially eliminate the hypothesis that my legacy is intrinsically linked to my existence alone. In order to leave my nephew a financial legacy that would buy him more than a few minor Pokemon cards, I need to do something, or many somethings, to amass that kind of wealth. Unfortunately for my nephew, I'm an artist, where money is neither awarded by the traditional American marketplace, nor particularly recognized as a vital service. Unlike the greatest civilizations in history, we are the only culture where the amount of domestic wealth and the degree of investment in the arts and humanities is tragically disproportionate. Our celebrity-obsessed culture worships the cult of the charismatic leaders and not of the art they create. The ethereal magic inherent in the subtler arts is not respected as a form of currency deserving of respect, unless the object of that affection can pull in more than 100 million on opening weekend. Strictly speaking, for a vast majority of artists, creativity and energy and magic don't buy a house. What is our culture leaving behind to mark the time and space? If we're the new Rome, where's our Forum? If we claim a heritage from ancient Greece, where's our Parthenon? Who's our Athena? My vote is for the notorious RBG. R.I.P. We miss you. Our cultural legacy is invisible. It's a series of ones and zeros. It's wires and static and fiber optics and you've got mail. It's global currency and the currency of immediate connectivity. It's not nothing, but it's not a something. It can't be held or hung up on a wall in 100 years. Our pantheon is a patriarchy of privilege, and we worship the bear and the bull and the ringing of a sacred bell on Wall Street. It's not nothing. It's Pandora's alabaster jar. It holds within it the diseases of the world, but also the essentially human quality of hope. It's in our national DNA to seek life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's our charter and our drive to seek an immortal sense of security through the exchange and purchase of securities. It's an electronic marvel. It's profound and necessary. It's a legacy, but it's not humanity's. Those are an ethereal legacy and may not buy my nephew a house, but it may just feed his soul.
I think it's clear that there's no definition of legacy. It's everything. It's Pandora's alabaster jar and Mulan's gender-bending bravery. It's the violin in my grandmother's hand and my nephew's canutish blonde locks. It's my brush with royalty and a stained-glass window. It's an impression that's felt and never seen, and it's Plato's gift to philosophy and his denial of art as the deception of truth. And it's what I say now. If legacy is the story of who we are, if it's the reverberation of someone who once lived and took up space, it's neutral until it's assigned a quality after death. Abraham Lincoln has a legacy. Dr. King has a legacy. Mandela, Gandhi, Angelou, they have legacies. Malala Yousafzai, Greta Thunberg, Nicholas Lowinger, and Amanda Gorman are already creating legacies. The Buddha, Confucius, Muhammad, and Jesus of Nazareth have some of the most prolific legacies in history. But so do Genghis Khan, Joseph Stalin, Napoleon, Columbus, and Hitler. Darkness has a legacy too. So what will be your legacy? What will you do that will ensure people will say your name and remember you with a legacy of love? What actions will you take today to ensure that what you do is felt for generations to come? The way I see it, there needs to be a sea change, or we are consigned to darkness. What will you do to bring more light into the world?
There must be an utter sea change to see change. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. There is no chariot to take us to the afterlife. No Deus ex machina from the heavens to save us from ourselves. We have only our own diaphanous wings if we choose to fly. We don't have to be laden down and listless. We are not without agency or inspiration. We have the legacies of our ancestors, our ancient ones, our guides, gods, and heroes to guide us and give us strength. Our wings are not made of wax. We can fly all the way to the sun and steal back the Promethean flame that used to burn within us. We can and will drag that sluggish mountain back to us and bring about a reformation, a reconciliation, and a remembrance of who we are as one unified human race. Let that be our legacy. And it must happen now, with every breath, with every heartbeat, with every wink and smile. No moment can go unused. No potential to bring more light into the world can be wasted. If a butterfly's wings can cause a tsunami on the other side of the world, a smile between strangers can echo across the far reaches of the globe and return back 10,000-fold. Imagine the tidal wave. I have a name. It has the power to move mountains. I displace space. I have weight. I create space where there was only air, pushing aside atmosphere to make my lasting imprint and leave my markings in the caves and the caverns. A legacy is not only what you leave behind when you die. It is a living gift that you give the world to commemorate that you once lived. You touched the planet and breathed in the air. You drank water, stood on the earth, watched the stars, and you saw the faces of God.
If in 1,000 years I'm fortunate enough to have some remnant of something I once touched still exist, and if in 1,000 years some group of excavators is digging in the dust-covered ancient remains of what was once my home, should they happen to come across some small article, perhaps a simple cup, and turn it over, the letters on the bottom will say, Terra Taylor Knudson, Viking daughter, Dairy Queen, Pineapple Princess, and I will live again.
From every mountainside, let freedom ring, and when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and singing the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.